My name is Emma, and I'm 30 years old. I live in a small, rented apartment with my 8-year-old daughter, Mia. Life hasn't been easy for us, but somehow we've always found a way to keep moving forward. Just the two of us. Mia was only 3 when her father left. He said he needed time to find himself, but he never came back. At first, I was angry, then heartbroken, and finally just numb. I had no time to feel anything. I had a child to raise, bills to pay, and dreams that had to wait. I worked long hours at a small bakery downtown, the kind where the mornings start before sunrise and the days end in flour and exhaustion. My parents lived far away, and most days it felt like I was completely alone. But somehow I kept going. For Mia. Every morning I woke up before the sun, packed Mia's lunch, braided her hair, and walked her to school before heading to the bakery. The scent of warm bread and cinnamon filled the air, but behind the counter, I was always tired, physically and emotionally. I smiled at customers, took orders, cleaned trays, and tried to ignore the ache in my feet. By the time I got home, Mia was already half asleep on the couch, clutching one of her picture books. I'd kiss her forehead, whisper a promise that things would get better, and sit at the kitchen table in silence, wondering how. My pay barely covered rent, food, and school supplies. But I told myself, just one more day. Keep going. One cold evening in December, everything changed. I came home later than usual, the streets quiet and covered in frost. As I unlocked the door, I felt something was wrong. The apartment was dark. I called out for Mia, but there was no answer. Panic gripped my chest. I rushed inside and found her curled up on the floor near the heater, her face pale, her forehead burning. "Mia," I whispered, lifting her in my arms. She barely opened her eyes. I called for an ambulance, my hands shaking so hard I could barely press the numbers. At the hospital, the doctor told me she had a high fever and pneumonia. She needed to stay overnight, maybe longer. I sat by her bed all night, listening to the beeping machines, watching the rise and fall of her tiny chest. I had never felt so helpless. The next morning, the nurse handed me a form. Hospital bills, medication costs. I stared at the numbers. I didn't have that kind of money. I didn't know what to do. All I could do was hold her hand and pray she would be okay. 2 days later, just as I was about to leave the hospital to pick up an extra shift, a nurse approached me with a puzzled look. "Someone dropped this off for you," she said, handing me a plain white envelope. There was no name, no message, just the words, "For Mia," written in careful handwriting. Inside was a check for $15,000. I stared at it, my hands trembling, tears welling in my eyes. Who would do something like this? Why? I looked around the waiting room, hoping to see a familiar face, but there was no one. I had no answers, only disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. That check covered everything, and for the first time in days, I exhaled. Mia recovered quickly. Within a week, her laughter returned and the color came back to her cheeks. Life slowly slipped back into its rhythm, but the mystery of the envelope stayed with me. I couldn't stop wondering who had helped us. Then, one afternoon, as I was closing up the bakery, a man walked in. He looked familiar, tall, with soft eyes and a quiet presence. "Hi," he said gently. "I don't expect you to remember me, but a few months ago, I came in here every morning while my sister was in the hospital nearby." I suddenly remembered. A man who always ordered coffee and a cinnamon roll, who never said much but always smiled. "You were kind," he said gently. "You always asked how I was, even when I couldn't answer. That meant a lot to me. My breath caught. I knew. It was you, I whispered. He just smiled. You helped me through a hard time. I wanted to help you through yours. I didn't know what to say, only that my heart felt full. After that day, Daniel, his name I later learned, kept coming by, sometimes with a cup of hot cocoa for Mia, sometimes with a fresh loaf of bread from a shop across town, and sometimes just with a quiet smile that said more than words ever could. He didn't push, never expected anything. He was just there, on rainy days, on long days, on the days I didn't know how to keep going. Mia adored him. She'd run to the door when she heard his knock, her drawings clutched in hand, her eyes bright. My heart was slower to open. I had been hurt before, and trust was something I'd buried deep. But one night, as we sat on the couch after Mia had fallen asleep, Daniel looked at me and said, "You don't have to say anything. I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere." His words stayed with me. Not like a promise, but a quiet truth, a kind of safety I hadn't felt in years. And for the first time in a long time, I started to believe in something again. Hope. Weeks passed, and something in me began to heal. Mia laughed more, I smiled more, and Daniel, he stayed. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our little balcony, I realized life hadn't given me what I asked for, but somehow it had given me what I needed. Love found us when we least expected it, and this time I held on.